My name is Ethan, and until just a few days ago, I believed I was in a stable, happy marriage. I wasn't so naive as to think we were flawless, no marriage is, but I believed we were solid, strong, and trustworthy. I was completely unaware of my mistake. It began on a seemingly typical evening. Everything seemed stable, no indications of trouble, no instinct urging caution. My wife, Sophia, had been behaving somewhat aloof, but I attributed it to stress. Both of us had been facing demanding work, and I thought we simply needed some time to connect. I even crafted plans for a weekend getaway, believing that perhaps a shift in surroundings might rekindle our connection. But I never found the moment to mention it. That evening I returned home later than I typically do. After being engrossed in a project at the office, I finally arrived home and noticed something unusual as I pulled into the driveway. A different vehicle was stationed outside, not from a neighbor. I didn't recognize that person. An unsettling sensation lingered in my gut, yet I brushed it aside. Perhaps she was entertaining a friend. Perhaps it was merely something pure. I found no cause to question her, or so I convinced myself. I entered the room, and an unsettling atmosphere enveloped me. The house was eerily silent, yet it buzzed with an unsettling energy that sent shivers down my spine. A palpable tension that eludes the eye, yet resonates deeply within. And then it reached my ears. Joyful sounds of mirth. Heron. Yet it wasn't solely her voice. A man's voice accompanied it as well. Profound, recognizable. I pursued the sound. My heart raced with each step I took. As I rounded the corner into the living room, I came to a standstill. Sophia sat on the couch, leaning in closely to a man I recognized immediately. Ryan was his name. We weren't exactly close, but I was familiar with him. He collaborated with her. I encountered him at office parties and various gatherings, always under the impression that he was merely a colleague, nothing beyond that. Their exchanged glances revealed everything to me. My initial response wasn't anger. It wasn't sorrow. It was a strange, dreamlike detachment, as if my mind struggled to comprehend the images before me. I stood there, observing my wife, glow at something another man expressed. The subtle cues in her posture, the gentle brush of her fingers against his arm, the closeness of the moment. It was clear beyond doubt. I remained silent. I didn't burst in. I refrained from making any accusations. Instead, I took a step I never thought I would take. I removed my wedding ring. Sophia finally acknowledged my presence. Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her features as she hurried to compose herself. "Ethan," she began, but I interrupted her before she could complete her thought. I moved ahead, serene, perhaps overly so, and set the ring down on the coffee table that lay between them. "You left this behind at some point," I remarked, my tone unwavering. Ryan tensed up. He was aware. He realized that I had seen them. "However, Sophia," she paused, her lips parting and closing, as if she were grappling with the perfect expression. "Hold on, Ethan." Yet, I found myself already beginning to turn away. My hands were steady. My voice remained steady. I experienced a complete absence of emotion. Perhaps I experienced emotions more intensely than others. It overwhelmed me to the point where my body simply gave in. I approached the door, pausing for a moment before stepping outside, glancing back just once. I suggested that you consider how to articulate this. Whatever you believe this to be, it has come to an end. And then I departed. Uncertainty loomed over me, leaving me in suspense about what was to come. But what occurred? It was an outcome I could never have foreseen. I chose not to drive home that night, not due to a lack of destination, but because I simply didn't wish to return home. Where is home? The term had lost its resonance entirely. The home where I had devoted years to crafting a life with Sophia now seemed stained, as if it were the property of another. As I navigated the streets, the city lights streaked by in a blur, mirroring the whirlwind of thoughts racing through my mind. I revisited the scene repeatedly. The manner in which she leaned in, the sound of her laughter, and the fact that Ryan showed no sign of shame at all. However, the most peculiar aspect, I remained unperturbed. Perhaps it was disbelief. Perhaps my mind was still processing the entirety of the situation. Yet, rather than anger, an unsettling tranquility washed over me, as if I were observing the disintegration of my life from afar. Eventually, I found myself stopping at a diner in the dead of night. a classic spot adorned with flickering neon signs, featuring a waitress who seemed to have been serving there since the 80s. I settled into a cozy booth by the window, ordered a steaming cup of coffee, and gazed into the depths of the night. At that moment, my phone vibrated. Sophia. I chose not to respond. Yet another buzz, one more, then a message. Ethan, please return. It's time for a conversation. A harsh chuckle escaped my lips. Discuss? So now she wanted to have a conversation? Where was this sense of urgency when she was entangled with Ryan, laughing like a carefree schoolgirl? I placed my phone face down on the table and savored a slow sip of coffee, relishing the warmth that enveloped my chest. It ought to have brought me solace. It did not. Time slipped away, perhaps around an hour. Then another message arrived, a moment that sent a shiver through me. Ethan, if you would be so kind. He has departed. Simply return home. I chose not to reply. I found myself fixated on the message, attempting to unravel its meaning. He has departed. Did she send him away? Did he depart of his own accord? What made it seem as though she was by herself? A dark part of me craved to witness her discomfort, to allow her to stew in her own remorse and confront the stillness. However, my curiosity overwhelmed me. After settling my bill, I returned to the car and began my drive. Not due to my forgiveness of her, not because I felt prepared to engage in conversation. However, there was something about that text that just didn't resonate with me. As I finally rolled into the driveway, something caught my eye right away. The other car, the one that had been present when I first arrived, had vanished. The house lay shrouded in darkness, save for a solitary light flickering in the living room. Her silhouette was visible through the window, moving back and forth. I entered the room, and as soon as she laid eyes on me, her entire posture relaxed in a wave of relief. Ethan, she exhaled, as if she had been waiting to release her breath for an eternity. I remained silent. I closed the door softly, folding my arms as I settled into a moment of anticipation. She paused for a moment, then moved a step nearer. He departed. The moment you stepped outside, he was gone. I nodded, pretending it held any significance for me. That's great for him. Sophia recoiled at the way I spoke. I never intended for you to discover it in that manner. I released a laugh devoid of humor. Well, what's the point? Did you intend for me to discover this, simply expressed in another manner? Her expression twisted in distress. No, I never intended for you to discover it at all. That is not correct. I tightened my jaw, sensing the initial spark of an emotion that resembled anger. Is that really meant to uplift my spirits? She shook her head rapidly, tears brimming in her eyes. No, Ethan, I made a mistake, all right? I erred. I inclined my head. An error? What is the duration? Her throat moved subtly. In what way? Lengthy. A moment of stillness. At last, after several months. I let out a breath through my nose, gazing beyond her as if she were invisible. Several months. As I contemplated the idea of a simple weekend escape, she had been quietly orchestrating her own secretive plans for months without my knowledge. She extended her hand toward me, yet I stepped back, gently shaking my head in refusal. Refrain. Ethan, please, she murmured. It held no significance. I truly swear. It was foolish. I made a foolish mistake. I gazed at her then, truly gazed at her, and for the first time in a decade, I perceived her for what she truly was, an unfamiliar face. I shook my head, took a deliberate step toward her, and spoke in a voice so composed it unnerved even me. There's only one opportunity, I stated. There is but a single opportunity to reveal the truth to me. Enough with the deception, enough with the embellishments. Sophia's eyes grew large with surprise. I assure you, this is the truth. Are you really? I observed her intently, anticipating the moment she would falter, and then it happened. The tears, the guilt, the trembling hands, all dissipated, and in that fleeting moment, I glimpsed something entirely different flicker across her expression, a chill in the air, something methodical, and that was the moment of realization. She felt no remorse. Fear gripped her, not of losing me, but of what might unfold thereafter. I remained in place, observing Sophia, hoping for her to utter something, anything, that might contradict my thoughts. That would lead me to think, even if just for a moment, that the woman I married still lingered somewhere beneath the betrayal. Yet, it was evident in her gaze. She didn't feel crushed by the pain she had caused me. She wasn't falling apart due to the destruction of our marriage. She felt a sense of fear, uncertain of my next move, and that understanding struck me with more force than anything I had ever experienced. "What is the reason for this moment?" I finally inquired, my tone steady. "What is it about tonight? What makes him the one?" She breathed out unsteadily, rubbing her arms as if she were chilled. "Ethan, I lifted my hand. "Negative. Absolutely not. I didn't intend to do that. That was an error. Simply share the reality with me." Her jaw clenched. After a prolonged hush, she murmured softly, "It was a matter of curiosity to discover if I still had the ability." I blinked. "What is happening?" She gazed at me, her eyes glistening, lips quivering. But I had grown wise to that trick. I was curious to find out if I still possessed something. I'm at a loss for words, Ethan. I sensed we were merely following a routine, and I longed for a sense of desire. This wasn't part of my plan. It simply occurred. I found it amusing at that moment, a genuine harsh laugh. "It's been months, Sophia. So, you're saying you unintentionally found yourself in someone else's embrace for months?" Her expression shattered. "I don't have feelings for him." That caused me to stop and reflect, not due to any concern for her feelings towards him, but because I abruptly understood the unspoken truths she was withholding. She also hadn't expressed her love for me. I allowed that to linger in the space between us. The stillness lingered, thick and oppressive. "Text, I see," I replied after a brief pause. "I returned here this evening, hoping that perhaps, just perhaps, I would encounter something that resonated with clarity. That might clarify why you discarded everything." She advanced with purpose. "Ethan?" I took a step back. "No," I responded with a sharp tone. "You can't reach me now, not following this." Her hands dropped to her sides. I ran a brush through my hair, breathing out gently. "What comes next? What's the grand scheme? Ryan has departed, as you mentioned. Has he departed for good? Or merely until you manage to sort out this chaos?" Sophia recoiled. "I instructed him to go away. What is the reason behind this?" She paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. I let out a dry laugh. "Is it because you were discovered? Or is it that you genuinely wish to resolve this?" She remained silent. And that revealed it all to me. I pivoted towards the entrance. "Ethan, please," she urged swiftly. "Kindly refrain from proceeding with this action." I paused, my fingers resting on the doorknob. What should Sophia do? "Please, stay with me. Remain. Let's have a conversation. Let's unravel this together." I turned to face her, and for the first time since entering, I allowed her to witness it. The fatigue, the disillusionment, the burden of her actions. "What needs to be figured out?" I inquired, my voice scarcely rising above a murmur. "How can I act like this never occurred? How can we return to the previous state of affairs?" She gulped nervously. I gently shook my head. "It seems you're not quite grasping the situation, are you?" Her lip quivered. "Ethan, you shattered us." She wept, letting the tears flow down her cheeks. "I understand." "No," I said, moving in closer, my tone unwavering. "You're unaware. It's a profound experience to gaze at someone and come to the unsettling realization that they were never the person you believed them to be. It's disheartening to realize that every moment of trust I placed in you was merely a punchline for you." She wept into her hands. Yet, I offered her no solace. "This isn't the moment. You've made your decision," I concluded at last. "And now, I am creating my own." Without uttering a single word, I pushed the door open and ventured into the frigid night air. For the first time in years, I experienced a sense of relief that allowed me to truly breathe. What transpired after that? That was the twist no one anticipated. I remained close to home that night. I navigated the roads for some time, my fingers clutching the steering wheel with such intensity that my knuckles became pale. My thoughts swirled like a tempest. Recollections of our shared moments collide with the stark reality of her actions. At one moment, I discovered myself stationed outside an inexpensive motel. The neon vacancy sign pulsed erratically, its hum cutting through the stillness of the night. I entered without a second thought. only faintly recalling the exchange with the man at the front desk. I simply required a space to exhale, a place free from the lingering shadows of my past relationship. Reclining on the rigid mattress, gazing at the ceiling, I found myself anticipating the surge of anger to wash over me, the genuine, unfiltered fury. A rage so intense it compels me to shatter something, to howl, to seek explanations she would never provide. Yet it never arrived. Instead, all I experienced was a profound emptiness. I must have drifted into sleep at some moment, as I was roused by the buzzing of my phone, squinting against the bright light of the screen. I noticed her name, Sophia. I chose to overlook it. A moment later, another message arrived. "Ethan, if you would be so kind, please let me know your location." Then yet another. "I wish to hold on to you tightly." A harsh laugh escaped my lips. "It's past the point for that, darling." Numerous messages flooded in, yet I chose not to read them. I flung the phone onto the nightstand and massaged my temples. What am I meant to do now? Separation? Clearly. How can one possibly begin to unravel a decade of marriage in just one evening? The home, the finances, the companions we had together. Everything. It abruptly resembled a treacherous landscape I needed to traverse. A sudden knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. I stood still, unable to move. No one was aware of my presence. It must remain a secret. My heart raced as I cautiously rose, made my way across the room, and peered through the peephole. Sophia. My chest constricted. How on earth did she manage to track me down? I paused momentarily, cracking the door open just enough to catch a glimpse of her expression. Her appearance suggested a restless night, with eyes rimmed in red and a glassy sheen. "Ethan?" she whispered, a wave of relief washing over her face. "Thank goodness," I raised a hand. "What led you to discover me?" She nibbled at her lip. "Your location remains connected to my phone from when we had our accounts linked. I needed to have a conversation with you." I breathed out through my nostrils. "There's really no discussion to be had." "Kindly." Her voice trembled. "Listen to what I have to say." A part of me felt an urge to shut the door on her abruptly, to depart in silence. Yet, despite my reservations, I moved aside and allowed her entry. She entered with a sense of uncertainty, as though she was acutely aware of her outsider status. She embraced herself tightly, her breath unsteady. "Ethan, I understand that I've caused you pain, and I realize I can't undo it, but I promise I intended to end things with him." I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I let out a derisive laugh. "What is it that you fear precisely? That I would discover? That he wouldn't desire you once I was gone?" Her expression contorted, negative, fearful of being separated from us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "You lost us the moment you chose to believe I wasn't sufficient." She wept, her cheeks glistening with sorrow. "I feel a deep sense of disappointment in myself for this. I long to return and erase it all." I examined her closely, seeking authenticity in her expressions. A fragment of my being yearned to trust her. I hoped this was merely a dreadful error that could be rectified. However, she erred. She dabbed at her tears, cleared her throat, and murmured softly, "I have already informed Ryan that it has come to an end." I paused. "Did you inform him?" I reiterated. "So, does that imply it wasn't finished before I found you?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat. I was considering bringing it to a close." I chuckled with a hint of bitterness, my hand brushing across my face. "Incredible. Absolutely incredible. Ethan, please," she implored. "I wish to hold on to you tightly." I gazed at her then, truly gazed at her. In that instant, a truth dawned on me. One I should have grasped from the very beginning. Her presence wasn't driven by affection for me. She found herself here, grappling with the unraveling of her grip on reality. And she loathed that more than anything else. With a steadying inhale, I delved into my pocket, my fingers wrapped tightly around the frigid metal. Silently, I removed my wedding ring, raised it between us, and set it down on the motel nightstand. Sophia's expression twisted in distress. "Ethan!" I locked eyes with her, my voice unwavering. "You need not let me go, Sophia." I took a step back and opened the door. "Because I was never truly yours from the start." She released a choked sob, yet I didn't pause for an answer. I stepped outside, shedding the weight of my history. I believed that was the conclusion, yet I was completely unaware of what lay ahead. I walked away from Sophia in that motel room, yet she still had unfinished business with me. Far from it. The following days passed in a haze. I returned to my routine, attempting to navigate my days as if I weren't burdened by a tempest within. Yet the burden of what transpired adhered to me as if it were a second layer of flesh. Wherever I went, it seemed as though everyone could sense it within me. The treachery, the weariness, the void. Sophia continued to send texts and make calls. I chose to overlook her. Then arrived the emails. Initially, they echoed the same urgent cries. I would appreciate it if you could engage in conversation with me. I kindly ask you to reconsider this action. My affection for you knows no bounds. That was an error. However, the messages began to shift. One morning, I opened my inbox to discover a solitary sentence gazing back at me. I must share the reality regarding Ryan. I gazed at the screen, a knot forming in my stomach. I was aware of the trap, yet despite my instincts, I found myself crafting a reply. I'm indifferent. Please refrain from reaching out to me in the future. Just a few minutes later, my phone started to ring. I hesitated to respond, yet an unsettling intrigue, a lingering resentment, compelled me to answer the call. Sophia's voice emerged from the line, delicate and trembling. Ethan, if you would be so kind, just listen to what I have to say. I let out a deep breath. You have 2 minutes. A moment of silence lingered before she leaned in and whispered. There were others too. I scowled. What is happening? She inhaled deeply. Ryan has been at this for years, alongside other women with whom he collaborates. I didn't hold any significance for him. I was merely a name among many on his list. I dragged my hand across my face. Do you really believe that alters anything? She paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. It's important to be aware. One of those women happened to be married to your boss. My blood turned to ice. I straightened my posture. What did you just mention? She let out a soft sniffle. She goes by the name Emily. She has shared a decade of marriage with Daniel and Ryan. He has been involved with her for months, as he was with me. The atmosphere felt as if it had been drained completely. Daniel was more than just a superior to me. He was among my dearest companions, the individual who provided me with my initial significant opportunity, who supported me during challenging moments. Someone once expressed that I was akin to family for him, and his wife had been entwined with the same man who shattered my marriage. The room began to whirl around me. I accused you of lying. Sophia released a sardonic chuckle. I long to be. However, if you're skeptical, feel free to ask Daniel directly. I concluded the conversation in silence. For the first time since this ordeal began, I found myself no longer submerged in my own treachery. I was on the verge of pulling another into the tempest. I was completely unaware of the revelations that awaited me. I sat there, phone gripped tightly in my hand, thoughts swirling in a frenzy. Daniel, the individual I held in high regard, the individual who supported me steadfastly over the years, a figure who consistently emphasized the values of loyalty, trust, and diligence. And his wife had been involved with the same man who destroyed my marriage. I found myself faced with a pair of options. I could turn my back on this, hide it away, and allow Daniel to discover the truth on his own, just as I did. Alternatively, I could take the path that was never taken for me. With unwavering hands, I pressed the digits of his number. The sound echoed. 1 time, twice. Then Daniel's voice came through, relaxed and unaware. Ethan, my friend, hello there. For a brief moment, I paused. We need to have a conversation. At this moment, his tone changed immediately. What seems to be the issue? Not via phone. Let's rendezvous at Ray's in 20 minutes. Stillness. In that case, I will be present. Upon my arrival, the diner was almost devoid of patrons. I settled into a booth at the rear, fingers intertwined, mentally rehearsing the phrases swirling in my mind. What is the best way to inform a man that his wife has been unfaithful? How do you phrase it? Hey, do you recall that person who's been grinning at you in the office? Indeed, he has been involved with your wife. Daniel entered 10 minutes later, his expression marked by bewilderment. He glided into the booth opposite me, placing his phone on the table with a casual ease. Okay, now I'm feeling a bit anxious. What's happening? I inhaled deeply. It revolves around Emily, his brow knitted in concentration. What is her story? Our eyes locked, unwavering and resolute. She is involved in a secret relationship. Daniel froze in place. The silence lingered, heavy and oppressive. At last, he released a dry chuckle. Is this a prank of some sort? I gently shook my head. His expression turned steely. What on earth are you saying? I leaned in closer. Ryan here. The mere mention of that name was sufficient to break Daniel's composure. I noticed how his eyes deepened in shade, the subtle quiver of his jaw. You are not being truthful. His voice lacked inflection, yet I could sense the underlying tension. I retrieved my phone, accessed Sophia's most recent message, and gently pushed it across the table. Take a look at it. Daniel gazed intently at the screen. I witnessed the instant the realization hit him, how his hold on the phone grew firmer, how his nostrils expanded with intensity. Silently, he rose to his feet. Is that you, Daniel? Yet he was already in motion. I tossed some money onto the table and trailed him out the door. Where are you headed? I insisted. He continued on without pause, to seek solutions. Hold on, Daniel. I seized his arm, compelling him to confront me. It's best to avoid making any rash decisions. His eyes blazed with a perilous intensity. Don't dictate my choices to me, Ethan. I let out a quick breath. Believe me, I completely understand this sensation. However, it's essential to reflect. Daniel's hands clenched tightly into fists. What does it matter? Did I really just allow her to get away with that? I gently shook my head. Negative. However, you don't enter without awareness either. His jaw tightened. What would you recommend instead? I found myself without a response. Not at this moment. Yet, what I was aware of. The conclusion had yet to be reached. Far from it. Daniel moved restlessly, his fists tightening and relaxing, breath sharp and irregular. It was evident in his gaze. He was struggling to hold it all together, and I recognized that sensation intimately. Betrayal inflicts deep wounds. It transforms something deep within you. It prompts you to reconsider all that you know. We require evidence, I stated at last. Daniel halted abruptly, pivoting to face me. Evidence? What additional evidence could possibly be required beyond this? He brandished my phone triumphantly in the air. Your spouse confessed it. That ought to suffice. I gently shook my head. It isn't. If you enter that situation armed only with my statement and a text message, she will surely refute it. Give it a twist. Portray yourself as the antagonist. Daniel's jaw clenched. He was reluctant to acknowledge it, yet beneath the surface, he understood that I was correct. Following a prolonged silence, he let out a breath. What are our next steps? I paused. Then, before I could hesitate, I pulled up a number on my phone and hit dial. The phone rang twice before a voice finally responded. Sophia's voice wavered as she remarked, I didn't expect to hear from you again so soon. Daniel tensed at the mention of her name. I require your assistance with something, I stated plainly. A moment of stillness. Then, cautiously, what comes next? I inhaled deeply. Let's connect. At this moment, quietude. So, where to next? I cast my gaze upon Daniel. He gave a slight nod. I mentioned it would be at your place. Don't forget to bring your phone. You will reach out to Ryan. Hashtag. We sat in the car, positioned just across the street from my childhood home. The lights glowed warmly within, and through the window, I caught sight of Sophia moving back and forth, lost in thought. Daniel drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, a sense of impatience radiating from him. Are you confident she will follow through? I gave a slight nod. She is determined to set things straight. She will reach out to him. Moments later, my phone vibrated. A message from Sophia. He is starting to improve. Pay attention. I placed her on speaker. The call connected. Sophia? Ryan's voice carried a hint of apprehension, as if he sensed that something was amiss. You have to be honest with me, Sophia insisted, her voice trembling. What is the total number of women that have existed? A prolonged stillness. At last, Ryan released a deep, measured breath. Is it significant? Daniel's whole form tightened next to me. Indeed, it holds significance, Sophia retorted sharply. Were you with her? Yet another moment of stillness. Then, with a nonchalant air, Ryan remarked, Do Do you truly desire the list, darling? Believe me, you were not unique. Daniel clutched the dashboard with such intensity that it seemed like he could tear it away at any moment. Sophia's voice trembled. Your trust in me was unwavering. Ryan let out a soft laugh. Well, that falls on you, doesn't it? I could sense her breath catch. And what of Ethan? What's the situation with Daniel? Ryan chuckled softly. Is that you, Ethan? Seriously, you really think I was concerned about him? He was never going to discover the truth. And what about Daniel? It seems Emily has enjoyed herself. I fail to understand the reason for her to halt at this point. That was the end. Daniel flung the car door wide and marched angrily toward the house. Before I knew it, I found myself right behind him. Sophia flung the door open just as Daniel stepped onto the porch, her eyes filled with terror. Daniel, wait! Yet he moved past her without a word. Making my way directly to the kitchen, I found Emily standing there, completely still. Her phone remained clutched in her hand. Her complexion faded as she laid eyes on him. Is that you, Daniel? He interrupted her. Refrain. Simply refrain from doing that. Emily's lips opened slightly. Yet, silence enveloped the moment. She was aware. She was aware. In a moment of silence, Daniel removed his wedding ring, set it down on the counter, and left without looking back. I trailed behind him. As we returned to the porch, Daniel exhaled slowly. I've reached my limit, I acknowledged with a nod. Same here. We remained in quietude, two souls who had just experienced profound loss. And yet, in that moment, for the first time in ages, a sense of liberation washed over me. Daniel and I lingered in the chilly embrace of the night. The heaviness of all that had just transpired began to take hold. The end had come. Truth prevails. Enough with the treachery. Let go of the remnants of a past that has already fallen away. Daniel exhaled slowly and faced me. What comes next? I offered a faint, weary smile. At this moment, we progress onward. He let out a derisive laugh. Proceed. It seems straightforward when you put it that way. I simply shrugged. It certainly isn't. Yet, it's an improvement over remaining trapped in this chaos. After days of stillness, a change stirred within me for the first time. The fury, the agony. It remained in place. Yet, it was no longer the only emotion I experienced. There existed an additional element. Exhilaration. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of documents, challenging discussions, and the daunting task of extricating myself from the life I had constructed alongside Sophia. She made an effort, naturally, contacted, message sent, implored me to engage in conversation. However, I had reached my limit. I had no intention of allowing her to return. I discovered a modest apartment on the other side of town, unremarkable, yet it was my own. Leave the past behind. There are no recollections of a romance that had devolved into deception. A new beginning awaits. Daniel and I maintained our connection. It seems that experiencing something like this with another person creates a connection that is unlike any other. We shared drinks, exchanged chilling tales about divorce lawyers, and even found moments to chuckle at the utter madness of our experiences. One evening, while we lingered at the bar, Daniel gave my arm a gentle nudge. So, when will you venture out again? I arched an eyebrow. Where exactly are we returning to? He wore a sly grin. Exploring connections? Have you ever considered what individuals might engage in when they find themselves with unfaithful partners, yet are not bound by marriage? I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Not in the near future. Come on, my friend, he said. Not every woman fits that mold. I let out a breath. I understand. All I require is a little time. For the first time, I truly meant it. I held no bitterness. I wasn't shut down. I refused to allow that experience to shape my identity for all time. I simply required some room to rediscover myself. I found peace with that. A year later, everything about my life had transformed entirely. Exciting new opportunity, a fresh apartment, a fresh sense of tranquility. One morning, I happened upon Daniel at a coffee shop, and he wore a smile, truly smiling, as he sat opposite a woman I had yet to encounter. I arched an eyebrow. He simply smiled and silently said, "Later." Do you want to know something? I felt joy for him. In reality, betrayal doesn't have to shatter your spirit. It has the power to mold you, empower you. Ultimately, there are moments when losing it all is precisely the catalyst you require to truly discover who you are.